Our panelists will be fully introduced in their special capacities when their time comes. So I will leave that, the nitty-gritties and details at that stage. My job is very simple. This morning, I've done the first leg of welcoming you to this two-day retreat. This workshop is intended to rally, to energize, and refocus the efforts of all change-seeking forces in Uganda towards the issues that matter in what seems to be efforts without an end in sight to make our constitution matter and all legislation that derive from it matter to the people and to the country. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to also try and offer ourselves the necessary motivation that will offer us the energy desired out of our blocks, beyond the rhetoric of the need for reforms, be them electoral or constitutional, by resolving to take necessary positive steps towards the talk. It's my sincere hope that at the end of this conversation today and tomorrow, we would have reoriented ourselves on the practical and legislative voids that we need to urgently fill in order to give ourselves and the country a chance and a departure from the crude law of rulers towards the constitutionalism and rule of law. It is my considered opinion, ladies and gentlemen, that we don't have to belabor so much about the cause of our current crisis, which has put the country in almost an existential crisis, graduating steadily into a league of democracy pariahs, an unenviable state of affairs 60 years after obtaining what was supposed to be our independence. All we need now is to appreciate the magnitude of the problem and agree on ways of dealing with the crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, the opposition in and outside the parliament needs to find the opposition in and outside the parliament needs to find the necessary motivation and the drive to make these areas for reform rallying points for the entire country and all stakeholders in Uganda's democratic process. We need to summon the traditional and non-traditional bases into this conversation. It should become a matter of public duty and burden, like most other citizenry obligations, not a preserve of politicians and their traditional allies. It is very likely that some of the emerging conversations out of this retreat will sound old to many veteran actors like myself in these spaces. But the theater and platform we seek to occupy and influence has over time enrolled new actors and goers, bringing with them new profiles and aspirations. We need to find the imperative to reorient ourselves, undertake deliberate learning and unlearning in the coming month as we seek to expand and enlist new actors and the changing mode of meeting our shared aspirations. When I look into this boardroom, there are several new actors. My brother and friend, the Honorable Kabuye, for example, is barely 25 years now? 25 years. For the yesteryears, he probably had different views of how his life will play out. He finds himself at the epicenter of what are going to be very critical, life-changing decisions for our people. So he needs to be in this space with all the actors like myself to be able to garner the necessary momentum and the consensus, to be able to drive the necessary momentum in the population and beyond. Of course, the current state of affairs in our country, especially in terms of rule of law and constitutionalism, has occasioned wasteful expenditure of public resources and worsened the political tensions, just awaiting a trigger to explode. Therefore, when we discuss reforms, we need to urgently consider what is a reality of Uganda's changing political landscape. The existing legal and electoral framework for elections is not sturdy enough to guarantee free and fair elections. The country needs reforms to the constitution and legislation that affirms and supports the independence of the Electoral Commission, protects against disenfranchisement of citizens, protects the rights of the opposition candidates, and ensures principles of transparency, equity, and accountability. In addition, there's a need for the legal regime to ensure a level playing field for all participants in elections and outrightly prohibit the participation of armed personnel in electoral processes. Honorable comrades and participants, our Constitution, in a way, has lost its identity over time and the purpose for which it was formulated. Some of you who really take time to understand our constitutional perspective will know that, for example, the 1995 Constitution was predicated on a two-term president. And as we speak, it is a constitution without term limits. The question of the day would be, is it still the same consensus? Are we still on the 1995 consensus, or it has been shifted, and therefore we desire new perspectives on how to progress, given the fact that the Constitution as predicated then was shortchanged and shifted. I've cited a few cases here. That the case of the Honorable Karuhanga Gerard versus Attorney General, which is famously known as the age limit constitutional petition. Justice Kakuru made the following observations in his dissenting judgment, and aptly highlighted what constitutes what has been fractured and tilted in the basic structure of our Constitution. He said, the sovereignty of the people of Uganda and their inalienable right to determine the form of governance for the country. 2, the supremacy of the Constitution as an embodiment of the people's sovereign will through regular, free, fair elections at all levels of political leadership. Political order through adherence to popular and durable Constitution. 4, political and constitutional stability based on principles of unity, peace, equality, democracy, freedom, social justice, and public participation. 5, arising from all the four above, the rule of law, observance of human rights, regular, free, and fair elections, public participation in decision-making at all levels, separation of powers, and accountability of the government to the people. 6, non-delegable rights and freedoms and other rights set out in the extended and expanded Bill of Rights, and the recognition of the fact that fundamental rights and freedoms are inherent and not granted by the state. 7, land belongs to the people and not to the government, and as such, government cannot deprive people of their land without their consent. 8, natural resources are held by government in trust for the people and do not belong to the government. 9, the duty of every citizen to defend the Constitution from being suspended, overthrown, abrogated, or amended contrary to its provisions. And 10, Parliament cannot make a law legalizing a one-party state or reversing a decision of a court of law as to deprive a party. It is absurd, honourable members and distinguished participants, that for a considerable period of time, the foregoing principles have not seen the light of day. It is those principles that have guided our situation analysis and informed our conclusion that the regime in Kampala is deliberately stalling and derailing all efforts geared towards electoral and constitutional reforms. A reality that requires going back to the drawing board to address the pertinent issues of governance bankruptcy, and editorial tendencies. I have been sharing with comrades here inter alia that as the opposition and all of us who desire change, our requirement to meet cannot be any more urgent than now. Even if we met for a whole day and quarrel as the opposition, it is okay. So that at the end of the quarrel, we find a new motivation and fresh perspective. It's very, very important. Honorable colleagues and distinguished participants, the nation deliberated on the constitutional framework that was promulgated in 1995. On the face of it, and all intents and purposes, our constitution was destined for success. As a constitutional law practitioner and legislator, I know that the constitution gains much respect if it stands for a considerable period of time without amendments. But I'm aware also that this revered document can be amended if the dictates of time and the people wish so. But unfortunately, in the case of Uganda, ours has been amended on the whims of one person, General Museveni, and for his personal benefit. I don't find tenable to wait for the constitutional review by government. Over the last 3 years, there have been attempts by government to initiate constitutional and electoral reforms. It is this deliberately obscure stance that has prompted some of our colleagues like Honorable Niwagaba Wilfred to initiate constitutional amendment bills. We remember and recollect so well the people's the document that contained the people's wishes that was launched at Africana, I think in 2016. We're also aware of individual members' efforts, Dr. Lulu Mebaiga's effort towards the presidential transitional bill that Parliament then considered as being personal to the person of Museveni and therefore rejected. So these efforts cannot be left to die in vain. I believe that Parliament, led by the opposition, should assert its role and sufficiently apply itself to the legitimate demands of our time. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and honorable colleagues, our actual program is impressively rich. I encourage you to actively engage in all these discussions and debates. Raise your frustrations and perspectives, and do not hesitate to ask questions, even when those questions are most unsettling. This is the space to have these questions raised so that we can correct our path. Ladies and gentlemen, I truly believe that this interaction will leave us a better people and with better perspectives to reflect on a big obligation of rescuing this nation that hangs on the threshold of an existential crisis as an independent and durable nation state. I want to thank you for finding time to share in this conversation. I don't take your time for granted. I would like in a special way to thank our distinguished invited guests for sparing this time to occupy this space with us.
Opposition, leaders of political parties, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure for me to be given this opportunity to be here to share some views. The topic I was given, as you see from the program, I would only wish to add that there were some, the letter also said it should be in the context of what key legislative reforms are required to improve Uganda's political landscape, what can be achieved through the legislature, is it a constitutional overhaul or merely electoral reforms? It's fared ahead of the 2006, 2021, 2011, 2016, and 2021 elections. So it is in that context, that I will be making my presentation. Before I begin my presentation, I wanted to prelude it with a quotation from the Daily Monitor of Monday. What the Daily Monitor, in an editorial, wrote on Monday. An editorial of a newspaper is a very important thing to pay attention to. And this is what the editorial of Monitor of Monday wrote about this workshop. This week, members of the opposition political parties are expected to converge in a workshop to moot ways for a fresh push for constitutional and electoral reforms. It is more of a once every 5 years ritual, where opposition parties come together, speak some good English about the sitting government, and issue a well-edited document. It can be a tiring exercise to follow, considering that what is going to be discussed may not be different from the events held prior to 2001, 2006, 2011, 2016, and 2021. In fact, most of the resolutions, however good, are never adopted. Nonetheless, every small success in improving the hygiene of our elections should be uploaded. Uganda's record on reform since 2001 clearly demonstrates lack of political will to address fundamental flaws in the country's electoral laws. The fear of the sitting government is that a fair playing field could lead to loss of power. Contextualizes this workshop. In other words, there are very big challenges. Therefore, in the context of the discussion, I looked at it from various interventions before every electoral cycle. First, I looked at the Professor Sempebwa Constitutional Review Commission of 2004. Two, I then looked at the political parties which got involved prior to 2011. That was Conservative Party, JEMA, Uganda People's Congress, and the Forum for Democratic Change. The four political parties came together and instituted an audit of political, legal reforms required for good governance prior to 2011. I served on that committee. We came up with the proposals, and later on, I was instructed to reduce those proposals in private members' bills to make it easy for Parliament to enact those reforms. I drafted the Constitutional Amendment Bill, Presidential Amendment Bill, Electoral Commission Amendment Bill, Local Government Electoral Bill, 5 in total, and I have made them available to you. The essence was to make it easier to have these reforms passed by Parliament. I handed it over to the then leader of opposition, but he could not get space in Parliament to introduce them and have them debated. A lot of work done by political parties from 2008 up to 2010. Yet the leader of opposition could not be given space to present already made bills just ready for introduction as private members' bills. Prior to 2016 elections, I looked at the Citizens Compact. Civil society organizations went all over Uganda, meeting Ugandans, collecting views, and came up with a compact on what reforms they wanted. They produced a book. I have also given it to you, to guide legislative reforms of our system. The other one was the
Honourable members, let us speak our tea quite silently. So that
Electoral Commission there. How does it come in place? The Speaker's Committee in Parliament. It is a question of political parties in Parliament agreeing on who the commissioners are going to be. Impartiality and independence are critical. Without it, we shall continue to have lamentations and wailings about free and fair elections. That you must address. When you look at the Constitution, it says an electoral commissioner in Uganda should have somebody with a considerable experience. Demonstrated what? Something like a demonstrated, somebody whom everybody will look up and say, yes, this one can do the work. Dan Mugarura, then electoral commissioner of FDC, filed a petition in the Constitutional Court, saying that only one person qualified under the Constitution, and is seeking to have them nullified. I argued that petition. We didn't make it. But one of the CVs of a commissioner, of a person who was a commission, the CV which was given to Parliament, this is what that person put down. I was a class monitor in Senior 1A. I was a representative of education in Senior 2. I was a minister of education in Senior 5. Then after that person left Senior, got to university, started working. Now that person is giving the consideration